When it comes to innovative thinking and driving innovation, some utilities are still reticent to go all in, despite the fact that innovation can yield results far beyond our imagining. However, there is a methodology behind innovating. We need to apply speed and strategy and tap into the collective wisdom of the crowd to ensure success. To learn more about innovation and why it's absolutely critical to the energy transition, I'm joined by Kim Getgen, CEO and founder of InnovationForce. Kim shares some fresh and thought-provoking perspectives on how innovation can be done right and the important role of effective leadership in overcoming barriers to innovative thinking. I'm Pamela Largue, and this is the Energy Transitions Podcast. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. We're talking about innovation and its role in the energy transition. When I think about innovation, I have perhaps a limited view. I think about a startup with a novel idea, but obviously it's so much more than that, which is why I'm really pleased to have you chatting with us today. What exactly is innovation in terms of how you've come to understand it?
This is great. Now, I'm glad that you're broadening the aperture for what it is, and we can start with a definition because then it'll ground the rest of our conversation. I like to define innovation as anything new or useful that creates value. And that value could be for your customers, it could be for your internal employees, but at the end of the day, it's a new thing. What's new for your utility may not be new for another utility. So it's perspective. And so what I like to say, it's anything new, first of its kind. It's a new thing that you're doing that has not been attempted yet in your organization. What that means is that it's difficult because utilities, for example, we're masters at production at scale. We're masters at operations. The majority of our business is really spent project managing, construction, operations, driving really, I think, complex projects through all sorts of tools, right? That'll tell us if we're on time, on budget, data-driven stats on uptime. That's our core. When we ask utilities to innovate, it's like putting on a new set of clothes. It's going to feel uncomfortable because most utilities don't know how to take in the new and get it through an approval process. And I keep saying utilities, but it's most Fortune 1000 companies. It's particularly hard in the energy industry because utilities are so regulated. We are a bit risk averse, and we don't have the budget to develop or innovate at risk. So all of these things, the regulation will create more bureaucracy because we have to mitigate risk. We have fewer dollars to innovate. We have to lean hard on partners. And we're really good project managers, but we might not have innovation mindsets. So I think what we really need to establish right in the beginning is like, what is innovation and why is it so hard, particularly in the utility? And absolutely, startups, for example, they may be in the energy sector bringing the new. They have the freedom and flexibility to develop these new ideas at risk because they could be venture backed with millions of dollars or venture-backed funding that allows them to take these moonshot risks. But at the end of the day, those startups have to sell their concept to the utility for the most part. And the utility is going to take that new idea through some sort of a process to decide, is this ready for our service territory? And is it ready for production at scale? So regardless of who's doing the big I innovating, as sometimes my friends in the industry like to say, like utilities will tell me, we're the little I innovator and our startups are the big I because they're developing these new ideas at risk. The utility still has to get this new idea that the startup is selling through their bureaucratic process. The bureaucracy exists for a reason. It's because we're regulated and we need to make sure that we're not taking on too much risk. it can get a little challenging. And I know you have some questions about that later. Maybe I'll pause there, but I hope that sets the chapter one scene for our story today.
Indeed, chapter one of many. And Kim, it's fascinating. You talk about how for utilities, it's almost like putting on a new item of clothing. But when I think about the energy transition and beyond the utility, it's like a total wardrobe change. And for some, it's an entirely new fashion outlook. So it's major disruption, major change. But for the energy transition to be successful, and not just within utilities, but the broader landscape, innovation is clearly critical. It's non-negotiable. Am I correct?
Absolutely right. I'm going to repeat a quote that I always hear is wrong, but I think it's a really good one to bring in right here. Um, Electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of the candle. And that is what we're dealing with right now in the energy industry. It is breakthrough, it is transformational, and it's changing everything. For us to be able to hit the clean energy transition, these decarbonization targets, this is not going to be what we're used to, continuous improvement of modernizing our grid. We're talking about changing the grid from the inside out. What used to work in that one-way centralized system is not going to work in a decentralized system using intermittent sources of energy to drive scale, right? So what I see is, and I like to call this looking at big trends and big themes over history and time, they're calling this Industrial Revolution 4.0. And so what we're seeing is the technology advancement that is coming in our modern world is hitting the utilities backyard, I argue, more than any other industry. So in Industrial Revolution 4.0, physical infrastructure is getting digitized. So how in the world is the utility going to be able to ingest all of this technology advancement? We're talking about technology advancement, not just in grid mod and virtual power plants and all the things core to our business that we might feel comfortable with. We're talking about mobility. We're talking about 5G. We're talking about AI. So all of this new, these billions and trillions of dollars of technology advancement is coming to a service territory backyard near you. So it's going to come down to how is your utility going to be able to ingest this new world of industrial 4.0. It will not be continuous improvement. It is absolutely going to be breakthrough. And that's where I think, Pam, your thought on how big this is, it's an industry thing that we're all attempting together to accomplish on some level. But then inside of our utilities, I would argue it's not just the change from technology, it's the change to our business process to ingest this technology that is really going to change not just the way we work. In many ways, this is also exciting because we have new people coming into the industry, non-engineers, engineers. I'd say it's a party, doors are wide open, it's going to take a village. And now we need a lot of different thinkers sitting around the table to really think through what this major disruption is going to be. Because your engineers might be thinking about it from a reliability standpoint, but who's thinking about it from the customer's point of view or the community's point of view, right? So I think this is a really amazing opportunity to reset the table, right? Just kind of put a line in the sand and say everything we knew in the past is not going to be how it is in the future. We're entering this unknown and it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. But leading, and for many utility leaders, I will say, as you start to develop your leadership skills to lead your teams through the unknown, what came naturally to you in leading an operations driven organization is not going to get you to leading a team through an unknown. So you may even find yourself having to unlearn some of the skills that got you to where you to get the utility and your customers and community and the world for that matter to where we need to be with this breakthrough transition that's coming.
Kim, when I was preparing for this podcast, one of the questions I wanted to ask with innovation, like you mentioned, just the speed and scale of the disruption and these breakthroughs, it's about failing faster, learning faster. So the process needs to speed up. And then it dawned on me, but it's already so fast. Is speed really what we need, or do we need to apply more strategic thinking and more wisdom when it comes to the manner in which we are innovating? Because I think that is equally important as the speed. Perhaps we can touch on that for a bit.
Glad the three words you used were perfect: wisdom, speed, and strategy. Okay, these are, I think, the three major components. It's actually a lot of what we preach at Innovation Force. So the speed, I'll start there. It is absolutely needed. And the reason that we need the speed is it's hard to get this data. I've been trying to find good data sources for this, but I look at how long does it take us to make decisions on the new? How long on average is it taking the utilities? And if I can't find that information, sometimes I just look globally at Fortune 1000 companies. How long is it taking us to make decisions? On average, it is estimated that it takes an organization 12 months to make a decision on a pilot. Should we even try this thing out? 12 months on average, decision by committee. And when I say decision by committee, I'm talking like 20 people. Time, that's expensive. When we started trying to calculate, like, well, what did this decision cost? We were estimating around $250,000. On the next step, the pilot, so like, okay, it gets cleared. Now we're going to pilot it. You can look at data from Lawrence Livermore Labs and others in the industry, but they're saying around 3 to 4 years really to pilot and just start production. I mean, that's not even getting production at scale. I wrote an article last year that talked about a not even a disruptive idea, but it was a incremental idea that took 40 years in the energy industry to gain to gain any momentum. It was 40 years, I think, to get a 4% penetration rate. And so I kind of was looking back on, well, 40 years seems like a long time. What did Apple do in 40 years? And it's like, well, they created, $1 trillion market cap in 40 years. Right? That's an extreme example, Pam. But when you really think about the common everyday decision making process, I argue it needs to be faster. We can't take 12 months to make decisions when you have Industrial 4.0 in your face and your portfolio of ideas. It's not going to be like 2 or 3. You're working on 40 or 50 ideas that you need to clear, right? Some of our customers have built portfolios up to 200 or 300 ideas, right, that they're rapidly making decisions on. So that decision making piece on should we pilot needs to go faster, not just for the utility, but make it faster for the startup, because too many of our good startups are dying on the runway because they run out of their venture-backed funds. And even to the point where some of the VCs have walked away from utilities. If you're trying to start a company in the utility industry, they won't even fund you because they're like, oh my gosh, pilot purgatory, these utilities won't make a decision. And so it's particularly hard for many to get funding to even bring your new idea to market here. So that decision-making step needs to go faster. The piloting step needs to go faster. This is something that we really preach hard, and I get that it's a stretch goal, but I don't think we need to spend years piloting. I would really push your audience to think through, like, go check out design thinking, right? Go check out agile and lean ways to go and run pilots for your organization. In the Innovation Force world, we like to say, can you come up with a challenge statement that you can test in 90 days or less? If you can think of your pilots, your pilot projects of rapid, quick, 90-day projects that are testing a thesis, you're going to get a quick, easy no or yes on, is this thing got potential that I would want to maybe test it again and move it to production? Or is this just not working out right now because it's just too much of a promise and I need to put it back and archive it for later and maybe try it out next year when the technology is a little bit better for my service territory or my environment? So if you could be thinking about a couple things to go faster: one, tight challenge statements, like using the scientific method like Edison did back in the day, which is how he got to creating the grid to begin with. You start with really tight problems that you want to solve, And then you can couple your test plan to that problem. And if you're asking problems that are longer than, let's just use 90 days as a measurement. If it's taking too long, go back to your problem statement. Maybe you're biting off too much. The sooner we could get these assumptions tested out in the field and then build on top of them incrementally, which, by the way, is our safe place when we're looking at big disruption, focus there, right? And those rapid pilots will help you learn faster, document those learnings, learn from them. We call it building creative agility. If you're able to build creative agility as a capability inside your organization by rapid experimentation, testing, and learning, you're going to create an organization of problem solvers. Their muscle gets built bigger and bigger to go after those bigger, disruptive, scary breakthrough ideas, because now they have the chops to figure out how to define the problem, how to test it, how to learn from it, start over. So that would be the speed. I know you mentioned wisdom and strategy as well. I would love to get on those, maybe mention two things on that front. Strategic alignment is so important because I have heard a lot from my friends in the innovation space at utilities. There's one side of us that wanted to get our innovation program started. So we started going to all these conferences and participating in all these incubators, and we're testing what's cool and new. We get it in, and then we find out there is no connection to strategic alignment. We got it all the way through the pilot, and then our board was like, why were you doing that? So I think the pressure is on in this operating expense constrained environment for the innovation leaders to prove that they are strategically aligning what they're testing. If you know the challenges or the strategic areas that your utility is focusing on, and you can align your challenge statements to those areas of focus, then you can go out and find the solutions rather than starting with the solution, only find out like there was no alignment. So start with strategic alignment, just know where your utility is going. Most of us have had to produce tons of documentation and filings and public utility commission reports here in the US, but there's tons of grid modernization plans, across the world. Just read what you're committing to, and then you can figure out those capability gaps and create challenge statements. You're going to be strategically aligned. And then the third thing you said is wisdom is so important, because this is where I think we're failing. There's a missed opportunity for us to collaborate better between the US and Europe, is wisdom of the crowds. And so I'm a big believer in ecosystem innovation, especially in the energy industry, because the grid is a societal good, right? We're all around the world trying to hit this clean energy target. So we could, I believe, as an industry, be doing a better job of, I understand our grids are different, but we could be doing a really good job of learning from each other. So creating global ecosystems where wisdoms of the crowd are able to participate and share their learnings in a safe way that would allow us to reduce risk and time. We are a big proponent of building ecosystems. In fact, we have built one ourselves that's free, that we invite everyone in the industry to join, so that you can see what around the world utilities challenge statements are and what are some of the more cutting edge solutions that are out there. If we could start harnessing wisdom of the crowds better, we're going to see a lot of benefit in speed, strategic alignment, and also cost.
Wisdom of the crowd. I love that concept. Obviously, innovation is key to maintaining a competitive edge. But as you say, you have to remain mindful that it's actually a collaboration and will go further in partnership.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the competition, if you really think about it, I think we're feeling the competition between the funding. It's like, well, look over here. The US is doing this IIJA thing, and the EU is doing this thing over here. And we're comparing dollars to dollars. And are we at a disadvantage because of that? But I would just say globally, we're all in the same boat. Utilities spend 0.1 to 0.05% of their EBITDA on R&D. So that amounts to $1 billion to $6 billion annually for the industry. We need to be spending 50 billion at a minimum a year over the next 20 years to even get close to hitting some of the modernization that we've been talking about in the transition. And so I think that where we should really stop thinking about it's, of course, your service territory and your utility is unique to you. And what you do with the idea is your IP and unique to you. However, because we are all in a budget constrained environment, we cannot develop at risk like an Apple or a Google. I think if we could start to really harness the power of the ecosystem, harness the power of this data, this research that we're learning around the world, and use it for good, why wouldn't we do that? The grid is a societal benefit. It's not just a benefit for you to make money in your service territory. That's true. We want to drive growth. We want to drive growth and competitiveness, but we also want to serve the needs of the global community. It's a complex problem, far too great for any one of us to go it alone. Look at Edison. He didn't go it alone. He created a lab. He was one of the first lab creators to collaborate and commercialize all of this technology that we're still using 150 years later. So I think there's a lot of really good lessons to be learned through collaboration. There are no lone wolves in the innovation world. If you look at any big breakthrough technology and it was credited to one person, go back and do your research. You're going to find out that there was a whole crowd or ecosystem involved behind that idea.
Indeed, it takes a village. Well said. Kim, I want to pivot slightly. In order to overcome the barriers to innovation, in your opinion, could you point out 3 specific solutions that you think, okay, if we could get this right, we would really provide a much needed boost to the innovation landscape? That can be a broad or macro perspective, such as finance or policy, down to perhaps a mindset or culture change within an organization. You have carte blanche.
No, you were hitting on it earlier. It is cultural. And I'm so glad that I have an opportunity to address that now. And like, where are we in our 4th chapter? Because there's so much that we have in our control if we just look at our culture. There's some things that are outside of our control because we're highly regulated. We're going to get the dollars we're going to get. But inside of our control is absolutely the way that we want to drive culture inside of our organizations. And so I see 3 key barriers in every innovator I talk to where they get hung up. I can point to one of these 3 things, and then I can point to 3 solutions, 3 capabilities that an innovator leader can use to drive innovation. I learned this myself. I've been leading innovation teams into unknown territory to try to drive new ideas and commercialize them for over 2 decades. And when I had a chance to really step back and reflect on this during COVID, it really came to me that for a long time, I was blaming myself as a leader, that for whatever reason I was failing, but it turned out it was a bigger cultural thing going on inside of the organization. And then I felt so much better and I could relate so much more positively to many of the other innovators I've talked to because they were falling into the same traps. They thought that maybe it was their leadership style or themselves. And it turns out, no, these are 3 big traps that you can look for in your organization that you can actually fix. So the first is political. Innovation usually starts with a political barrier because when a new idea comes into the organization, the questions are who should own it? Who gets to make the decision on it? It can turn into a turf war, right? If we don't know what to do with that idea, and it's not a standardized process for it to, because it's well defined that it should go to this department or that leader. Now you're going to spend the first 12 months of the new idea debating it politically. There can be land grabs, you name it. You've seen, probably all seen it and have felt it. The first barrier is definitely political. Who should own it? Why are they owning it? Who gets to make the decision? And why do they get to make the decision? So that's political. Bureaucracy is the second one. And bureaucracy comes from the fact that organizations that are highly regulated will slow innovation down for a really good reason. They are trying to avert risk. And so if you as an innovator can understand that you are in a big machine that is not going to change for you, but that you can change your innovation process for the business and adopt the checkpoints that they're going to need to have for you to be able to innovate, you're going to have a far higher likelihood of success and you're going to save a ton of time. And then the last piece that I see, and these are usually when innovators have had a really good run. They got through the political hurdles, they got through the bureaucracy, they got their idea to the field, and now all of a sudden the field isn't adopting it. It's like, what happened? You go back and see all the widgets still sitting on the shelves and they haven't been deployed. Like, what's going on? That's usually status quo thinking. And so I think this is one of the most challenging pieces of innovation. If you innovate and leave out the most important stakeholder, which is the people who are going to live with your innovation, if you leave them out of your pilot process, you're missing a huge opportunity because they may have some really good reasons why your new idea is not better than the way they're currently working. That tendency to get stuck in status quo thinking is what kills a lot of really good ideas and a lot of really good innovation. Unfortunately, it's so costly because at this point, you've spent all that time and money to pilot, you've spent all that money on the widget that you want to deploy. And now there could be a cultural issue with your crew or a good reason why the crew or someone closest to the ownership of that technology could have told you this thing isn't going to work at scale and they weren't heard. Politics, bureaucracy, and status quo thinking are all things we need to defeat with three capabilities. I call them the three C's. They are based on a book called Collective Genius that my co-founder, Dr. Linda Hill, wrote. Collective Genius, if you don't have time to read it, just go to her TED Talk, Collective Genius, Google it. You'll see what these three capabilities are all about. The first one is creative abrasion, and that's about having healthy conflict and early making decisions so that we can create cultures of psychological safety so that we can push back on each other through a open marketplace of ideas that's competitive. Because let the ideas be competitive, not how we're partnering with each other. So you can pick the best idea and move forward. So you'll have a higher likelihood that that idea is going to be something that's worthwhile. Your team will start to gain confidence, that they're being seen, they're being heard, and they can live with decisions, right? They can live with it because it was like, all right, I got heard. I get it. I'm not going to get, like, I hear this all the time. Like, I don't agree with this one, but I can't find a good reason why it shouldn't be trialed. So yeah, let me know what you learn. Like, let me have an open mind to know what to learn. So that's creative abrasion. Creative agility is creating cultures of learning experimentation, like we had talked about previously. So the better you can get at rapidly experimenting, thinking about and using design thinking concepts, but rapid prototyping, piloting around really strong challenge statements, that helps create agility. So now you can become an organization, a problem solver. So you're building that capability muscle. And then the last is called creative resolution. And creative resolution is, what do you do when you take all of this information and you need to make a decision to go at scale? Is the decision-making process fair? Is it integrated? And is it transparent? Who's making the decisions? Is it always the bosses? Who's being heard in that room? So if you can have a more transparent, integrated, and your company of innovators feel that the decisions are being made fairly, you have a higher likelihood of overcoming that status quo thinking. Creative abrasion, creative agility, and creative resolution are the three C's. These are the capabilities that will help you build better culture. Don't wait for the perfect culture. Don't wait for the perfect budget. It is never going to come. But what you can do as a leader is drive an innovation process that builds these three capabilities. Call me a year from now. I bet you'll say my culture got a lot better. I can see changes in my culture as a result of the work I did to create the three C's.
Clearly, as a leader, you have a great deal of experience. You've described yourself as a chief listening officer, if I'm not mistaken. And clearly, you've done a lot of listening and you've really engaged with this topic and the people behind the innovation. I mean, that must be quite exciting.
So the chief listening officer is, like, I put it out there because it's definitely a stretch goal for me. I believe in the shadow and the light, like sometimes the shadow comes out when really you should be working on leaning into that thing that you really need to bring. And that for me is listening. But I did want to tell you, Pam, that when I do listen to utilities who are in it right now, I do hear a lot of fear. And so The one thing that I wanted to have the courage to say today on this podcast was that it is a real shame that when I'm talking to innovators behind closed doors, they're trying to take on the impossible, building virtual power plants, bringing on all these DERs, making the transition. We don't know if things are going to fail or work. They're going to not. They're innovating on a shoestring budget in a highly regulated environment. Their leaders may not necessarily understand. The field may not understand. Other employees may be like, well, we don't really innovate around here. You are in a really hard spot. And so I do hear a lot of fear. If I had one message for the CEOs and the leaders of utilities, I would say it's time to get inspirational and aspirational about your goals and align them to the art of possible that could be coming through your innovation program and support those leaders. And it is not about you pushing the ideas down to them. It's about coaching them and developing them up so that your front line will bring the ideas that they know will solve the problems that they are closest to. So if we could hold a space, a safe space, to invert the triangle from top-down leadership into democratized, centralized decision making and inclusive way to hold a space for problem solving inside of your organization and coaching people up on design thinking, coaching people up on good culture, measuring those key capabilities that I've been talking about. It is possible to measure them. And it's not just doing an employee survey once a year to say, hey, how are we doing? It is more than that. It's about measuring capabilities that are supporting and building better culture. That's one thing I've been thinking about a lot based on my behind the door conversations in this industry that I've had with innovation leaders who are feeling stuck between a rock and a hard place. And they don't think that anything they do is going to be successful because they're trying to pull off the impossible, but they're not necessarily getting the support from their organization. And when I say support, it doesn't have to be budgetary dollars. It could be coaching, learning, training, awareness, communication, and being clear about the goals that we're setting. Make it aspirational. This is the biggest change we've seen in 150 years. This is like the mission to the moon. This is a moonshot. How are you inspiring the rest of the organization to hit this moonshot?
One last question. I can imagine that for you, to come into a situation or a behind the door meeting where there is a great deal of fear and trepidation about the unknown and perhaps the risks involved, and to be a part of that process where you actually turn that on its head, and then you start to see, okay, now we're tapping into aspirational thinking, and to see the results of that change, surely that must be so energizing for you.
It gets me out of bed in the morning. It is so amazing to see. I'm not kidding. It brings a tear to my eye in many meetings where I get to sit and watch. I'm thinking, oh, look at this creative abrasion. This is so awesome. A month ago, I was working with a couple of these engineers and they were a little bit afraid to challenge each other. Now, a month, 2 months, 3 months later, it's just becoming old hat. It's not personal anymore. We've feeling really good about, I'm going to ask these 3 questions and it's data driven. And, I'm going to give you a chance to respond and we're all going to learn from each other. And so, yeah, when you get to the end of the year with some customers, it's really nice to see the impact and watch them put together their impact reports. It is so inspiring, and the measurement of everything is so important, because if you can measure it, which is why we basically created InnovationForce, but if you can measure it, then you can really start to see the outcomes, or you can pinpoint, hey, maybe we just need to spend a little bit more time on this one thing. We just need to spend it on this one thing, get better at this one thing and see the results. It's why I believe that we're going to get there. I'm very optimistic. I'm an optimistic person by nature. I do believe that human ingenuity and innovation will get us out of this climate mess.
Kim, all I can say is a massive thank you for sharing your optimism and insights with me today and with our listeners. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Pam. It's been awesome to be here.
And I'd like to thank our listeners for joining us today. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Energy Transitions Podcast, brought to you by Enlit and Friends. That's a wrap from me, Pamela Largue, and our producer, Kamo Motse. We hope you can join us next time. Visit enlit.world or subscribe for more episodes.